Welcome to the Friday edition of Juan's World, and as you can see I've changed my background a little bit, just maybe for one time, I don't know, in response to what I was saying last Friday about production values. You know, how podcasters and other vloggers have a tendency to have interesting sets that they work from, whereas I typically talk from my couch, which is very plain, and the background is a plain wall because I don't have anything on my walls. I don't have any paintings or anything decorative at all. I'm not particularly interested in that. So this is just a small experiment. We'll see how it goes. And my topic today is remakes of popular television series that started in one country, the UK perhaps, or China or Korea, and then became adopted by companies in the United States. And I'm interested in what happens when a sitcom or a drama or a series of some sort migrates from one culture to another. And the reason I'm thinking about this right now is that I have a Netflix subscription, and a Korean drama, which effectively is translated as The Good Doctor, was on a little while ago, and I watched it. But I was aware, subtly, in the back of my mind, that there was a US drama of the same name, and that did also come on Netflix quite recently, and I started watching that too, and I was immediately struck by this very significant cultural differences between the Korean original and the US knockoff. And it reminded me of knockoffs that occurred in the early 70s by Norman Lear, who became a very well-known producer of television shows, and he's known for All in the Family, which was probably his first big hit, and Sanford and Son. What most people in the United States don't know is that those sitcoms in the United States are rip-offs of British comedies. In the late 1960s, there was a comedy called Till Death Us Do Part. Pause for a moment here to remind people that the phrase is till death us do part, not till death do us part. I don't know why people in the United States reverse those words, because neither is particularly felicitous as a phrase. But in the Book of Common Prayer, the marriage ceremony has the vow, till death us do part. And that was the name of a television series based on a working class man, Alf Garnett, his kind of long-suffering wife, his young daughter, and her boyfriend. And Alf Garnett is just this completely bigoted jackass, and always fighting the rest of the family, including his future son-in-law, who's very open-minded, kind of a hippie, and his daughter, and they're sleeping together all in the same house. And that gets translated into the US drama All in the Family, with a blue-collar bigoted man, his kind of mousy wife, and so on. Same setup. And then also Sanford and Son, which is about an African-American junk dealer and his son, comes from the British original Steptoe and Son. Steptoe was a rag and bone man with a horse and cart, and very, very old-fashioned. I mean, I don't know that I've seen a rag and bone man in England much after the 1960s. Did see them in Buenos Aires. It was quite a surprise. But the idea of a rag and bone man and his grown son working together was a uniquely British formula. But it did get translated into something quite different in Sanford and Son. So I'm interested in that general phenomenon, but I'm particularly interested in The Good Doctor because it's a translation of Korean culture into US culture. And that is monumentally different. All right, so here we are back on my couch. I took a look at the videos I made for the intro and thought that the background was a little bit too cluttered. It's my prep table in my kitchen. You can see all the rice and noodles and mate and pots and whatnot. They're not very interesting. The blank background is perhaps a little bit more so. So if you don't know the story or the background of Good Doctor, it's originally a Korean drama, and it was one season only, and I think that's very important. The United States drama that took off from it is actually now in its fourth season, I think. There's 3 seasons on Netflix, but I think there's a 4th season that's airing right now. So that alone is an important distinction. The Korean drama had a definite sense of beginning, middle, and end. And the Good Doctor, the protagonist, is a doctor who has savant syndrome and is also on the autistic spectrum. And the whole drama revolves around him being not socially capable at all, which means, among other things, that he has no filter when he deals with his patients. He just tells them the truth flat out. Even it means him saying, "Oh, you're going to die tomorrow." No bedside manner whatsoever. And the whole drama is about him becoming accepted within the hospital where he's working, where the chairman of the hospital or president or whatever, I don't know, I don't fully understand how Korean corporate structures work and what a difference is between a chairman and a president and director and all these other things. Don't know what the Korean words are. But anyway, the guy who runs the hospital is the foster father of the protagonist, who is autistic. His parents at some point abandoned him. I think he was about age 8, around the time that his brother and he were trapped in a tunnel and his brother dies. And so the chairman, who at the time I think was just a local doctor, adopts him and realizes his potential, including his savant abilities. That is, he can remember everything that he's ever read, and he can also picture the human body not only in 3 dimensions. He can rotate any organ or any part of the body at will in all the dimensions. And his main problem, apart from his inability to connect socially, is that he's physically very awkward. And so it makes it very apparent when you first see him that there's some kind of challenge to his life, because he's hunched over a little bit, he looks down, he shuffles when he walks, he always keeps his hands kind of together and fidgets and sometimes stares off into space. So it's very clear that he's not like the other doctors. And the whole course of the 20 episodes of the Korean drama is about him being accepted in the hospital. And for that to happen, there have to be changes on both sides. He has to learn how to do things a little bit more socially. He even has to learn how to lie, which and at the beginning he can't do. And the hospital has to come to understand his gifts, the things that he brings. So there's a kind of meeting of minds halfway, if you will. And at the very end, he is given his credentials as a pediatric surgeon, fully qualified. That's it, the end. And in the background is a very common Korean dramatic device, which is a power struggle between people at the top and the people wanting to be at the top. And this is played out in the Good Doctor Korean version, with the head of the hospital saying that if the autistic protagonist does not work out, he will resign. Right? So everyone ultimately accepts him as a doctor, thinking he will fail, and therefore the head of the hospital will resign, and the people who have their eyes on it will then succeed. Right? So there's a lot of people trying to torpedo his success for their own ambition. Very, very Korean. Korean dramas, by and large, doesn't matter whether they're crime dramas or romances or whatever, they typically involve a corporate hierarchy. In a romance, for example, it's quite common to have the head of a corporation be a young single man who ends up somehow or other being smitten by a woman who is not his social equal. Maybe it's his secretary, or maybe it's just some nobody off the street. And the whole drama revolves around this peculiarity of this rich, powerful, successful business mogul marrying a woman who doesn't deserve it socially, but who acquires her place because she's very smart, very accomplished, something about her. Occasionally it's a little bit off the wall, like she can see ghosts, or she's super strong, or something like that, something supernatural. But it's always a quirk that it's the man at the top of his profession getting involved in a woman who is not his social equal. In crime dramas and in hospital dramas, it's all about the power struggle between merit and birth. People who are born to money, born to inherit a corporation, versus people who actually deserve it because they're competent, as opposed to the heirs who are either semi-incompetent or completely incompetent, or corrupt. That's the other thing. So that's how the Korean Good Doctor plays out. It starts off with the protagonist becoming a celebrity on television before he's even been accepted as a doctor. The committee is meeting at the hospital to decide on him, and he's late. He's supposed to be there to be interviewed, and he's not there. The reason he's not there is because there's been an accident at the train station where he arrived in Seoul, and a little boy has had his carotid artery punctured and is bleeding to death, and this autistic savant rescues him, takes him to the hospital, gets into lots of problems at the hospital because the hospital doesn't recognize him as their doctor because he hasn't been accepted there yet, and he's got information that they need in order to save the boy, but they keep throwing him out. And there's this whole tussle where eventually the surgeon realizes that the young man who just looks like, you know, a simpleton or something, is actually fully aware of what's going on and is quite correct in his diagnosis that the child needs an echocardiogram, that he needs a particular surgery. So it all works out in the end temporarily, and because he's such a success on television as a celebrity, like overnight, boom, this kid saves a boy on a train station, and the hospital has to accept him, even though they don't want to, because he will bring them publicity, prestige. And the arc of the story is twofold. One of them is the battle for power at the top, and the other is the battle for acceptance of the autistic doctor in the hospital. And that's it. When he finally proves over and over and over again that he's not only competent, but he's better than all the others, and he knows more than the third and fourth year residents, and he's only a brand new resident. He's mastered everything, and everything his boss throws at him in terms of challenges he meets and exceeds. So there's all of that, and he learns to be kind of human and gets a girlfriend at the very end. One of his senior residents, who's like a secondary character but very important, and who thinks of him as a big brother, I guess, for most of the episodes, finally realizes that yeah, she loves him at the end. That's the arc of the Korean drama. The US drama starts off more or less the same, with more or less the same backstory. That is, the head of the hospital brings forward this doctor. I think his name in the US is Sean. In the Korean drama, it's Sihon. So it's Sean. So it's kind of a homophone, I guess. Sean also becomes a TV celebrity. This time, not from a train station, but from an airport where there's an accident. A sign falls and ruptures his kid's carotid and his trachea, so he can't breathe and he can't, and he's going to bleed to death. And another doctor starts intervening, and our protagonist comes along and says, "You're doing it all wrong. Do it this way," and he gets everything fixed up. Also has problems trying to convince the doctors at the hospital that he knows something else that they need to know about an echocardiogram, and blah 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 blah. And so it goes. But the US drama is clearly built on the idea that it's going to just keep going forward, and the characters are going to keep developing, which is a much more US drama series, or rom-com series format than in these Asian dramas. Most Asian dramas that I've watched on Netflix, I don't have a television, but I can watch Netflix on my computer. Most of them have one series only, usually 16 to 20 episodes, and it's like a very elongated movie with a beginning, middle, and end. Whereas the US dramas have a beginning and then a middle. And reminds me of other series that I've seen parts of in the United States, like Friends, for example, or Big Bang Theory, where they just kind of keep going and the characters keep developing, and it almost seems as if, at least to an outsider, I don't really care much about these things, but when I watch them, it seems like they kind of lose their way at some point, and so somebody says, okay, we have to pull the plug. Like in the Big Bang Theory, for example, everyone, well, except for Raj, everyone gets married, and one couple starts having kids, and it changes the whole dynamic. But when it started out, whenever, like at the beginning of the series, it's four like socially inept fanboy physicists, single, like incapable of having a proper relationship, which then develops into them having permanent relationships and getting married and having children, and so the whole premise is just completely changed. Same with Friends. Friends starts out with two men and two women in their 20s, single, and having relationship problems, and one after the other getting into a relationship that is permanent, getting married, and so there has to come an end because the whole premise has changed. And the premise of The Good Doctor in the US version is kind of muddled. It's because the Sean, the protagonist in the US version, if you just look at him, if you don't hear him speak, if you just look at him, he looks like anybody. Very young anybody, very young doctor. But he doesn't look like the Korean autistic doctor, who has very clearly defined physical features that you point to and you say, autistic. Now, whether or not this is legitimate is not always clear. But that's the Korean drama, whereas the US drama, you don't know he's autistic until something happens, like somebody tries to touch him, or he tries to have sex. And so the drama revolves around him coming to terms with his autism, or you might think of it as becoming not autistic. That's not true of the Korean drama. In the Korean drama, he does learn to accommodate to everyday life, but he's still clearly autistic, whereas in the US drama, there is this sense that autism can be overcome in time if you just do the right things. Now, of course, autism is a very complex series of mental disorders that you can't just generalize about. And that this doctor, whether he's Korean or from the United States, is in some ways quite highly functional. There are people on the autistic spectrum who are not particularly socially functional at all. And in the very far end of the spectrum, some who are one might say not especially autistic. I mean, they display autistic features that might be certain repetitive motions, certain inabilities to communicate socially and so forth, but fairly highly functional. And Sean and Sion are, in a lot of ways, highly functional. But the end of the Korean drama is simply a point of acceptance of both sides. Whereas in the US drama, there's a sense of continuing development of Sean. If you like, I mean, he's becoming like normal, like he's now, I saw the end of the third episode recently, third series, the last episode, which was pretty dramatic. He's had 2 love affairs. And the love interest appears in the US drama right from the very beginning. Like from either the first or the second episode, he meets this woman called Leah, and he's attracted to her, and they eventually live together as friends without benefits, and then he becomes attracted to a pathologist, and they become boyfriend and girlfriend, and after a lot of complications, they have sex, and then she realizes that secretly he's still in love with Leah, but Leah doesn't acknowledge this, and blah, 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 until eventually at the end of the third series, it ends with her saying, "Oh my gosh, I loved him all along." So you can see that with the US drama, there is more a tendency to just play things out, to develop things. And cynical as always, I'm inclined to believe that this has to do with money. That if a series is successful, then you want to go to a second season, and a third season, and a fourth season. I think Friends and Big Bang ultimately had 10 seasons. That it's a moneymaker. And so you have to just keep playing with ideas, like what's going to be the next trick or quirk that we can add in. Whereas the Korean series definitely has a structure that is meant to end, and right from the beginning they know we're going to play this out over 20 episodes, and episode 20 is the end. Now, I don't know about the finances of it, don't know anything about how television works in Korea, but I do think that money is behind it all, and I am bemused by the very Korean-ness of the Korean Good Doctor and the very much American-ness of the US version, that they start off in exactly the same place and almost immediately diverge. And like, for example, like the sexual component is right there, right from the start. It's kind of assumed, I guess, that if you don't have a male protagonist with a woman interest right from the beginning, then that's not a good series. And whereas in the Korean drama, it takes the whole 20 episodes for that to play itself out. And it doesn't even really play itself out with their first kiss until the final episode. Whereas Sean is having sex with multiple partners by the second season anyway. So I'm intrigued to study a little bit more about makes and remakes, like how they portray, from an anthropological point of view, the cultural interests of the places where they are made and remade. Oh dear, I should be doing more writing than watching television series, but I'm trapped indoors, and sometimes I have to just take a break and do something else. And I hope that you take a break from other things to watch this video, to like, to subscribe, and to come back Tuesday when I may have a recipe, don't know. May even put the camera in a different place yet again. I'll see you then.